Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Lisa Silverman. I'm the Executive Officer for the Office of Public School Construction and the State Allocation Board. So welcome today. We're happy to be here and provide you an overview of how to successfully access program funds for the school facilities program. So today we'll be covering, we'll have three agencies here to provide you that guided assistance. Again, we'll have the Office of Public School Construction, as we have introductions from Tracy Sharp, and she'll be covering that component. And we have folks from the Department of Education, John Gordon and Robert, is it Taylor? Wilson, I apologize. And then we'll have Sal Duda from the Division of State Architect as well that will be joining us today. So I know we have some critical information, and it's really important that we're all here today, and I'm glad we have a good audience participating. So with that, again, our goal is to ensure that you're successful in the program, and your success is our success. So welcome again today, and we look forward to providing you this overview. Thank you.
Well, good morning, folks. My name is John Gordon. I have with me Robert Wilson. I work in the School Facilities Transportation and Services Division. Robert's upstairs with our Career Technical Education end of it. So we're here to overview the Department of Education process for the Career Technical Education Facilities program. So with that, it's kind of an overview of what we will be covering this morning. Talk a little bit about Prop 51. As you're well aware, Prop 51 passed about a year ago. What it has done, among many things for facilities, has brought $500 million for the Career Technical Education Facilities program. And in this funding cycle, we'll be having $125 million set aside for that. So as you might be aware, some of you may have applied under the Career Technical Education Facilities program back when we had money back in 2006 under Proposition 1D. This, for the most part, will be a continuation of that program. So let me talk a little bit about what our role at the Department of Education is, because it's really twofold. Primarily, we will be reviewing and scoring your applications. This program is unlike any other facilities program that the state offers in respect that it's a competitive grant process. So there is an application which we will kind of lay out to you here in a little bit later this morning. So we will be reviewing and scoring your applications. Those that receive an apportionment, that receive funding, will end up coming back to the Department of Education, where we will be reviewing and approving your plans to ensure that the plans are consistent with what the application that you received a score on that is. And so with that, Robert, how does the Department of Education define career technical education?
Well, good morning, everybody. Robert Wilson again for the Department of Education. As John mentioned, the funds are available for career and technical education projects. So some people I feel that maybe we need a definition of what exactly career and technical education means. There are some people that think that, you know, if you have an English program or a history program or even a science program or physics program where you're working on most of the instruction is either problem or project-based learning, that's not really the definition of what career and technical education is. The defined definition as outlined by the Department of Education is it's a program of study. Okay, it involves a multi-year sequence of courses that integrates academic knowledge with technical knowledge and provides the students with a pathway to secondary opportunities and eventually, of course, careers of their choice. That's kind of what the career and technical, what CTE or career and technical education is, the definition of it. But what drives it is the standards, and those standards were adopted by the State Board of Education in 2013. The context standards used by educators They are used to build the curriculum, build courses, and build the pathways and into post-secondary education or employment. There's different types of pathway. The anchored pathways are the standards that all students need to achieve to master or the workplace competency in CTE curriculum and in the workplace. Pathway standards a little more defined and narrowed depending on what the industry sector is or the pathway. For instance, in a transportation, they're going to narrow it down to equipment use or safety issues and those kinds of things. It's more of a narrow focus.
Let me talk about the projects, a little bit about what projects are eligible under the CTE facilities program. So the Ed Code outlines essentially what this looks like under 17078.72, and this was actually passed back in 2006, and it largely, actually, it has remained unchanged. Within the language of the Ed Code, qualifying projects must, districts are operating comprehensive high schools. The Department of Education has identified these three education codes as how we interpret what a comprehensive high school would look like. Additionally, under the Ed Code, it allows JPAs operating CTE programs to qualify or to apply for funding for modernization projects, and equipment that you are seeking reimbursement must have a 10-year lifespan. Now, with the change, or with the Prop 51 passing, there are some additional things in terms of, well, what does this look like? If I receive funding back under 1D, can I come back for more funding? Tracy Sharp will share in more detail what that looks like, but essentially, if you have a project that has recently been constructed, as far back as 2006, you could prospectively apply for funding and potentially receive reimbursement for those expenditures. So as I mentioned, it is a competitive grant process. In order to receive funding within the grant, you really want to demonstrate the merits of your CTE program. You really want to demonstrate that it's demand-driven, that it's sustainable, that you have good partnerships, and that you're providing really a pathway for students for success, whether it's directly into the workplace or higher education. I'll spend the next couple of slides really talking about those three other bullet points. One is that each application must address one of the 15 industry sectors. So in some cases, what different questions that we have received is that, for instance, School District A is looking to build this very nice building that includes an auto shop, maybe a wood shop, a building construction trade type shop. How many applications? Can I just submit one application, one building? No, you would actually need to submit two, because we're really focusing, each application is really focusing on that program and what the outcomes are and what the makeup is of that particular program. So each application must address at least one of these industry sectors. The matching share requirement is that the state will match the local school district dollar for dollar up to $3 million on a new construction project and 1.5 on a modernization project. There's also a loan available, as there is no financial hardship under this particular program. And again, Tracy Sharp will provide more information on what that looks like. So the scoring and the funding piece of it. As I mentioned, the Department of Education will be reviewing these applications. You can receive up to 141 points, would be the max. In order to be considered for funding, you must have at least 105. The applications will be sorted in terms of how the funding is dispersed. There's attention to equity, so the funding will be based on where the school site is actually located. Again, Tracy will give more information on what that looks like, but it will be sorted by urban, suburban, and rural locales. And then this particular slide kind of talks about how the sorting happens, and again, Tracy will talk a little more at length in terms of how we will determine which projects will receive funding. So with that, you probably want to know, well, what does the application look like? So, Robert?
Okay, so the application is going to consist of 8 parts. You can see the CTE plan, pupil enrollment projections, feeder school information, accountability plan, educational specifications, budget justification, any unique conditions that your district may realize, and the overall feasibility of the program or your project. Your application submittal requirements, you're going to need to fill out a cover page, which is a Form A, table of contents, one-page project abstract, the 7 parts of the application. Part 8 will be the overall feasibility, and then, of course, we're going to include appendices and forms that will not count towards the 10-page maximum, but you're going to be responsible for submitting those. On the Form 1, the cover page, we're going to need all your contact information and the name of your district or school, JPA, whatever's applicable. We're going to need a signature from your superintendent or the superintendent designee. We're going to need board approvals, so board agendas and minutes. They don't really need to see the application, but they're going to need to see that you presented the application and it was approved. Okay. Then all the required signatures, of course, that go along with that. Industry sector, the minutes on file, and then any and all assurances or certifications that are required as part of the application. The one-page abstract includes a heading and a brief summary of the program and the equipment request, or whatever the case may be, either a new construction or modernization or equipment. The summary describes the project goals as they're related to the CTE opportunities for students, and that's a one-page maximum. That's kind of just a synopsis of what your project or program is going to involve. Okay, part 1, the CTE plan. Okay, you're going to outline the industry sector, and as John mentioned, if you have more than one sector, you're going to have more than one application, so you would have a different industry sector there. The course sequence or sequences along the pathways. We want to ensure that a CTE credentialed teacher is the one that's providing the instruction, so you're going to provide that information. Any of the labor market demands in your area. Okay, the rationale for the construction project, if it is new construction. Okay, CTE advisory committee, and all of that can be provided on appendixes A and B. Part 1 is also going to include access for all students. Your school's commitment to the CTE and to all students as well as all teachers, and a little brief description of how you're going to ensure that all students are going to be available. Historical evaluation of the program and the sustainability. We want to make sure that the program sustains and continues after the funds are no longer available. Okay. And then we also want to see your district support of the program too through your LCAP. Part 2 is projections of student enrollment. Okay, you're going to identify the total number of students that are going to expected to attend the CTE program, an interest list or those kinds of things. Okay, you're going to describe your procedures that you have in place to ensure that projected enrollment is met. Part 3, and we do have a form for that, an appendix for that and stuff. So you're going to list all the participants that were involved in the development of the project, your feeder schools, parents, students, counselors, any ROPs or ROCPs that are involved, your industry partners, business and industry partners from your area, community colleges, if you have any articulation agreements with the community colleges in the area or concurrent or dual enrollment programs, and then other post-secondary schools. And again, as I mentioned, that information can be provided on Appendix C. We've laid it out, so it's pretty simple to where you can list the people that are involved and what their involvement is. The accountability plan, you've got to describe the accountability plan for the enrollments and the outcomes. Are they going to receive, are your students going to receive a industry recognized certifications or certificate? Any related employment, not necessarily in your region, but any related employment that students will be available to. Post-secondary education, data collection, what kind of data you're going to collect, what you're going to do with that data. You're also going to describe how the school will meet the or exceed the obligations pursuant to Ed Code 51228. I'm not going to read that for you, but essentially if your high school, the secondary level, offers a CTE program, then you should offer instruction that provides a student with the ability to either succeed in a career or in a post-secondary opportunities.
So Part 5 is dealing with facilities, and here you have really an opportunity to demonstrate what your relationships look like, because really, at the end of the day, relationships really matter. The A part of it, really simple. Just give us a sentence. Tell us what your project looks like, whether you're buying new equipment, whether you're tearing down and rebuilding, whether you're adding a classroom, whether you're modernizing. Really succinct. Just tell us, what does the project look like? You also have to submit some plans. We'd like to see a site plan to see where your program is located on the site, especially with a new building. We're curious about access. If, in the case, say, if you have a theater and you need to bring lumber or supplies into that for your stagecraft, where are you driving on campus? So we want to see a site plan where your program is. We also want to see the floor plans of your classrooms and if you have, where your equipment would be located within that learning environment. So those two drawings are not, and I repeat, are not part of your limit, your narrative 10-page limit. I've had a lot of questions on that. They are not. They would be considered an attachment and appendices. So 2 points for each of those drawings. Space requirements. For this, it's getting, really want to see what is your thinking in terms of the planning process to really identify your spatial needs, because as you know, with CTE classrooms, they are typically very specialized. And they could look much different than a general classroom. So really articulate what are some of the spatial needs, whether it's this is how you came to needing X amount of storage, to maybe the importance of some pull-out spaces for your CTE program. What is your planning process? So who are the people at the table, and how are you going to ensure through the design of your construction project that what you're creating is an environment that is of industry standard? Because you want, as much as you can, replicate what it's going to look like in the real world. So you would, articulate what the planning process looks like, who's at the table. And the last part is really matching up your need to your coursework. So tell us, really articulate what that link is. If you need 3 classrooms, can you justify that based on the coursework that you've outlined within your CTE plan? So part 6.
Okay, part 6 is the budget justification detail sheet, and we've also provided Form B for you for that. You're going to provide the estimated capital cost per pupil and rationale, the method that you use to arrive at that cost. Describe the financial participation of your industry partners. So what kind of donations, what kind of assistance do they have? That can even be, it doesn't necessarily need to be industry partners. It can also be industry, from either business, also business, or even post-secondary institutions. Okay, and then industry collaboration with your equipment needs, and that's the input that you received from the industry to ensure that the equipment that you're buying is relevant to what the students are going to be exposed to when they do work in the industry. Yeah, for example, if you're gonna consider a transportation, and I'm the transportation industry sector lead, so transportation is near and dear to me, so that's why I keep mentioning transportation. But I mean, if you're talking about a new transportation program, you may talk to the people at Les Schwab and find out what kind of equipment they're using. So the equipment that you're buying is stuff that the students are going to experience and need. And then I think it's important that we want to make sure that you get the best, the most and the best money for your money. So we want to make sure that you use a best value and kind of outline what process you use to justify the equipment that you're buying. And then the maintenance and upkeep after the funds are gone. We want to make sure that you're able to provide continued maintenance and upkeep of the equipment that you buy. And there's a copy of what Form B looks like. Part 7 are unique conditions. This is an opportunity for you to describe what the unique conditions are for your district. If you're in a rural area and it costs a little more money or a little less money to have equipment delivered, or the construction's cost are a little more because of the area you're in, this is an opportunity for you to describe that. Any unique partnerships that you may be in, consortiums or those kinds of things, describe that. Any unique costs or expense issues, and then just even the physical plant. Part 8 is a opportunity for essentially the readers. That's not something that you're going to work on. You're not going to submit anything here. The reader is going to take the application as a whole and judge whether the project is reasonable and capable of achieving the intent of, again, Ed Code 17078.72. And they're going to also assess the cohesiveness and the viability of the total project. Is it something that's reasonable? Is it something that's really necessary? Is it going to be doable? Is it going to be sustainable? Those kinds of things. Okay, and here's includes some helpful hints that we've taken from, as John mentioned, the Prop 1D, the earlier rounds 1, 2, and 3. We've looked at some of those applications, and from those applications, we've taken things that we found that were helpful, and these are just helpful suggestions. We want to make sure that when you do submit your application that, of course, you've answered all the questions. Your answers are clear. They're concise, because remember, there is a page limit, so we want to make sure that you don't, and again, we're not reviewing them for grammar or those kinds of things, so we're not really necessarily looking for run-on sentences or did you use the proper punctuation or whatever. We just want to make sure that you answer the question and it's understandable and it's clear for the reader. The people in the past that were successful, of course, answered the questions in the order that was asked, so the reader is not going back and forth trying to find the answer or what question you're trying to answer and stuff. So make sure those are in order. It's best that a lot of times, if you want to start your answer by restating the question. Again, make sure that the equipment that you're talking about has a 10-year lifespan. And then, of course, make sure that your application, when it is submitted, it is complete.
Let me jump back real quick on this. So some other things that what we're hearing, some feedback regarding our forms is, for instance, the Form B. I'm getting a lot of feedback in terms of how maybe challenging it is about articulating all the equipment that I need, or articulating what my construction plan looks like. There is a small space for a description and cost for the construction part of it. What we've seen and what we will allow, as we've done in 1D in terms of your equipment, if you would like to chunk it out and say, this certain amount of equipment costing this much, and then behind it, if you do an Excel spreadsheet and itemizing that. Because the thing that folks need to understand is that with this application, once we're done with it, the Office of Public School Construction will use it as a resource to kind of determine what your apportionment will be. So your equipment needs should be as solid as you can make them, because once you receive your apportionment, you receive your apportionment. So I want to add that. So there will be an appeal process that will be outlined in much greater detail when you receive your score letter in February. This more or less kind of highlights what it looks like. No new information will be accepted. And like I said, the deadlines will be a rather tight turnaround for you to appeal. So we'll do everything that we can to be very responsive to requests you may have with that. So here's the timeline. In just a mere 21 days, this particular funding cycle, and again, it's only $125 million of $500 million. This funding cycle will, the applications will be due, and we're hoping to have another one here next year, looking like possibly September, still discussing. We will turn these around, projected to have them turn around on the 31st of January. There's kind of the window for your appeal process. And then if you would like to move forward with your score, then you need to submit it to the Office of Public School Construction. And by June of next year, it is projected to know which projects are funded and what those amounts will be. So, submitting this grant application, essentially we want 4 copies. Your original 3 copies, and then electronic file of this. You can send it to me, and all the information is on the application. Again, the deadline will be coming up here in a mere 21 days. If you have any questions, here is my contact information. Up in the CTE folks, Michelle McIntosh can address certain program questions. Again, this is a competitive grant process, so be mindful in terms of what kinds of questions you are asking. And then my assistant director, Fred Yeager, can also help on the facilities end. All of our stuff for the Department of Ed is on our webpage. So if you go to the CDE website and you type in CTEFP, CTE Facilities Program, in the search box, this link that you'll see will come up. So we have FAQs, we have a webinar of information that more or less we have replicated for you here. Obviously the application, and we also stripped out the forms as individual files, which hopefully will make it easier for you. So that concludes our part of it for the Department of Education. So I will now turn it over to Tracy Sharp.
Good morning, and thank you, John and Robert, for presenting the CDE portion of the application process for the Career Technical Education Facilities Program. Again, I'm Tracy Sharp. I'm with the Office of Public School Construction. I'm a supervisor in the Program Services section, and I'm leading the Career Technical Education Facilities Program, and we'll be going through the process of receiving your applications when they come to us in February. So today, there are a couple of things that I will repeat that John mentioned. Some of those I'll go into a little more detail. Other ones I'll spend a little less time on. But generally, the purpose, the application process, which you're all very familiar with at this point, but we'll touch on some particulars about it. The grants project funding order and how we're going to be looking at your projects, how your project should be submitted. The funding order, John mentioned that. We'll go over it a little bit more. Overview of the required documents and the priority funding process. So once you get through submitting your application and we process it, and then it's going to go to the State Allocation Board, how do you access the cash for your program? And a little discussion about the timing of that, because districts can strategically decide when they want to go forward with requesting an apportionment. So we'll look at some sample timelines of what that could look like for your application. So as mentioned, program was established in 2006 by Proposition 1D. You can receive funding to construct new facilities, modernize existing ones, and provide equipment for those facilities, with once again that 10-year useful life expectancy, which was part of the statute when it was passed back in 2006. Eligible applicants, we've talked about this before, basically school districts and COEs operating a comprehensive high school and JPAs for modernization projects. You are not required to have school facility program eligibility in new construction or modernization to apply for this program, and it does not impact your new construction or modernization eligibility unless you choose to draw on that eligibility as a kind of a partnered funding process, and I'll go through a couple of examples later for how you could match the two of them or for your project. So to be considered for funding, basically you start the process that John and Robert just described, submitting your grant application to Department of Education, get that minimum score of 105, and then submit your funding application to us. And here's just an overview of the process that I will go into a little bit more earlier. There's two ways to request funding. If you are construction ready, you're going to get an unfunded approval by the state allocation board. You'll go through the priority funding filing round process. You get an apportionment and a fund release in 90 days. If you're not quite ready with your approved plans, you're still in the planning process, and or your district wants to make sure, I want to be sure that we have a grant for this project, then you're going to come in and ask for a reservation of funds. And basically, that extends your time to get those plans approved by 12 months after you get an apportionment. And later in my presentation, I'll go through that timeline, like I said, a little bit more. We'll see this slide again and some sample timelines to see what that could look like for you. So as we said, new construction maximum grant is $3 million, modernization $1.5 million. Now this is per project. We define a project as by the site and the industry sector and the potential pathways that go with it. So that would allow you to have more than one project per school site if you've got programs for more than one industry sector. And as mentioned earlier, eligible projects. So because of the date of when the program was first put in place, eligible projects for new construction, as long as it was a CTE facilities project that was occupied on or after May 20th, 2006, anything after that or since then could be submitted. Modernization works very similarly, only we look at the contract date for the work done on CTE facilities since then. And if you previously received funds that didn't quite meet the maximum for that industry sector, you could add scope to that project as long as it's new scope under the next project. Your grant determination, so we looked at the caps, but basically it's based on your cost of construction, your site development in the project, and your equipment. Your project could consist completely of equipment. You may not need to build new facilities, you just need to add equipment to them. That would be an eligible project as well. For the matching share requirement, the statute stated that there must be a local match for the program, whether it's new construction or mod. This is a 50-50 basis. There's various sources that that match can come from, your district funds, your industry groups. There is no financial hardship, and this is per the statute for the program, but if the district would like to request a loan for each match, that is an option that's available. You would check that box on the funding application, and there's some additional worksheets that are requested to confirm the need for it, and you could get a loan that would have a 10-year repayment plan. There are a couple of exceptions to what can be used as a match, and these were regulation changes that were adopted by the State Allocation Board back in August and are going through the administrative approval process to become permanent in SFP regulation. And basically, CTE program funds, or excuse me, CTE grant funds that are coming from another state or federal program are not allowed to be used as a match. Those would include, but are not limited to, the grant that was provided under Assembly Bill 1802 in 2006, the Incentive Grant Program, the Pathways Trust Program, the Initiative Program, and the Perkins Federal CTE Program. So a little bit more information on the loan. As I said, it would be a 10-year repayment. It's based on the Pooled Money Investment Board account rate, and interest begins to accrue when you actually get the fund release, not when it's approved, but not till you actually get those funds. And we have 2 forms that are required. They're available on our website: the loan request itself, and then a fund availability worksheet. That's just a worksheet that shows us or demonstrates that you don't have the available funds for the match. So as I said, there's a couple of options for requesting funds. You could have a project that is combined with an SFP project, either modernization or new construction. It could be a standalone new construction project or a standalone modernization project. And if you're not construction ready, we've got that reservation of funds option available. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of what that looks like if you are, for starters, combined with an SFP project. So say you have a facility on your site that you are building, and it's got various things going on in that building. CTE is just one component. You have the option of requesting pupil grants through a new construction project for the CTE classrooms in that facility. And if you do, then the CTE FP grant could be used for costs over and above a basic classroom, as John mentioned earlier. Think of a basic classroom and what its needs are, and then we look at, or the law actually recognized that a CTE classroom could be larger, have more needs to it than a standard classroom. So this is an opportunity to use your pupil grants if you choose to, and then request Career Tech funds for additional costs above that basic 25, or sorry, in this case it would be 27 pupil grants. The main requirements here are that they all have to be on the same set of plans, and your new construction project and your CTE application either need to come in concurrently or the SFP project before the CTE project. So here's a quick example of what that calculation would look like for your project. It's half the cost of the construction, half the cost of your equipment. We have a calculation for if you did request pupil grants for that classroom, for what that deduction would be to represent the grants that you received. And in this case, all your site development would go on the new construction project, not on your CTE project request. So I provided an example of here of what that would look like, just for example. At the 100% amount, and then the 50% amount obviously represents what your grant would be. So here are your eligible costs once we've reviewed it. If there's only one CTE classroom in the project and all of your construction and equipment. For example, if your construction is $5 million, your equipment is $2 million, your site development, as I mentioned, would be on the new construction project. The deduction for 2017, we look at the annual adoption the state allocation board does for our current replacement cost for a classroom, and it's currently $347 per square foot, times 960 is $333,000 and change. That's the deduction amount for one classroom that we would look at in the calculation for your grant. So in this case, the total cost for the CTE project is $6.6 million. Look at half of that, the grant is the lesser of, because we have the cap. So in this example, your grant is the maximum, which is $3 million. If it's a standalone project, we don't have to deal with that deduction. It's just strictly 50% of your cost of construction, 50% cost of equipment, 50% site development, and that's how we arrive at your grant. Here's another example of what that would look like if it's a standalone project. In this case, the way I've created the example, it's under the cap. So your grant is 50% of the eligible costs. And then a modernization project, very similar. Typically in modernization, not going to be any site development, so it's just construction and equipment. Now, the law also allowed there to be reconfiguration on a modernization project. And the way we look at that definition of reconfiguration is, and I believe this is spelled out in regulation, is that you can add limited square footage to the building. So if you have an existing building that you want to expand, that could still be modernization. If you're adding a whole nother classroom onto it, then it's obviously going more into the new construction type of project. But in this case, you can expand say it's a wood shop or something, or you're trying to create something that wasn't a wood shop before and now it wants to be a wood shop, so you want to make it a little bigger, add some space to it, you can do that under the modernization piece. The only other thing I will add here is if you are converting an existing space from, say it's a library and you want to take that space, it's more convenient for a CTE program, and reconfigure it. The requirement is if you're using Career Tech funds to basically reconfigure that space, modernize it, and turn it into a CTE facility, that in the same project, using local funds, you're replacing that library. But none of that could be a part of the match. It's on your local funds you would need to replace that library or whatever the minimum essential facility is that's being displaced. And here's just another quick example of a case where a modernization project exceeds the cap. Total was $4 million, so our maximum grant is $1.5 million. And there is a case where I didn't include an example here of a modernization project partnered with a CTE project because there's no deduction. It's basically if a district wants to use their modernization funds for a mod project, as long as those are the expenditures for each project are separate and apart, the modernization has its piece at 60/40 and the CTE has its 60/40, and there's no crossover of the scope and the eligible expenditures. There's no differentiation, no deduction needed in those cases. So required documents. So if you're coming in for full funding, basically you're going to have your application for CTE facilities funding. That's our Form SAB 5010. Very short. I think it's only 3 pages in total. Your grant application with your score letter. As John mentioned earlier, having that grant application that you submitted to the Department of Education excuse me, is very helpful to us to really understand the scope of your project, to have all those details. What are all the equipment that you requested on there? What are you building or modernizing in this project? Especially for those projects that are coming in as a reservation of funds. It gives us a full picture of it so that as we're looking at your detailed cost estimate and the other information that's coming, that we really have a good understanding of where you're coming from. And yes, we can recommend approval of the amount of funds that you have requested, or ask questions about it for clarification as needed. So as part of that grant application, you will have already hopefully had a complete itemized equipment list. So that may already be in there. You might not need a second one. If they are new facilities or if you're modernizing them, you're going to need your plan approval from the Department of Education, which is different than your score letter, the actual plan approval. If applicable, your DSA approved plans and specifications, detailed cost construction estimate, and if you're requesting a loan, then the documents with that. So that's a full funding application. If it's a reservation of funds, it's most of those same documents, but obviously you're not going to have your DSA approved plans and your plan approval letter yet, or your CDE facilities plan approval letter. So those will come later. That's just a quick picture of our Form 5010. You'll find it on our website under the CTE Forms page. And now a little bit about the funding order, as John mentioned previously. So the way the school facility program regs are written, in this upcoming funding cycle, we would be following a standard process of looking at the locale of each project, and that's the locale of the site, the school site itself. And we use the National Center for Education Statistics website to help us determine that, whether or not the site is urban, suburban, or rural. And that is how our funding order is determined. We're using the locale and the score. So if you think about it like 3 stacks of applications, ranked, who got the highest score, down to the lowest score in each category, we're going to fund the top 3 in each locale and follow that process, and then the top 3 in the next group, and the top 3 and the top 3 in each locale until we run out of either funds or applications. If all of the suburbans get funded and there's none left and all we have is urban and rural, then it'll just be down to 2 categories. That's basically how the funding order is going to work here. And this is where your score comes in, and the higher the score, the more competitive your project, obviously. So back to that funding process, and a little bit, this is where I'll be stepping back into the priority funding process. So the priority funding process was adopted, I believe, back in 2010 to recognize that in order to get funds released for an approved project, there has to be a bond sale first. So the priority funding process was put in place. If you are at the point of full funding, you're going to submit your application, get an unfunded approval, and at the next priority funding filing round, they're held twice a year. And the first one begins the first Wednesday in May, and the second one begins the first Wednesday in November, which happens to be today. We have a priority funding filing round that starts today and goes for 30 days. Once you've got your unfunded approval, you are then eligible to participate in the priority funding filing round. And what that means is you submit your letter to the Office of Public School Construction that says, yes, I have an unfunded approval and I want to convert that to an apportionment. And yes, I will meet the requirements of that. And so if I get an apportionment, or when I get an apportionment, I will be ready to submit a fund release for that project within 90 days. You do that, there's a bond sale. We take those projects who all said yes when they submitted their letter to the board for approval. They get an apportionment, and then the fund release must come in within 90 days. That's if you're a full funding application. And if you've requested a loan for it, once there's an apportionment, we can release 10% of that right away. Sorry, that is, well, if you have a loan, if you're full funding and you have an approved loan request, you're going to get your full loan with your fund release. The 10% will apply if you're a reservation of funds, so I'll carry that over to the next one. So what's different about the reservation of funds, you're still going to participate in the same process. You get your unfunded approval and then request an apportionment. Once you get your apportionment, though, that triggers a 12-month time period, kind of a delay before your 90-day clock starts. So you get your apportionment, then you have 12 months to submit your approved plans and specs to Office of Public School Construction. Once you have submitted those plans, then your 90-day fund release clock starts. So you've got some extra time built in there for a reservation of funds to go and get those plan approvals. And in this case, if you've requested a loan for your entire matching share, you can get the 10% fund release at apportionment stage. That's seed money basically to help the applicant move forward on their project. So to help demonstrate this a little further, I hope that's the colors are coming out clearly for you. I wanted to take a minute to look at what that could be, because there are requirements for participating in the priority funding process. Once you get an unfunded approval, basically SFP regulations say you get 2 opportunities to pass, and if you don't participate or don't submit a fund release, any combination of those 2, then you would lose your unfunded approval. We don't want that to happen because we know you want to build your project. So what I'm demonstrating here in the timeline is basically that if we take these applications forward, they're coming in February 21st, 2018. Theoretically, we take them to the board sometime in May. My example is May 23rd of 2018. That will be an approval that is occurring during the priority funding filing period, the May-June 2018 one. If you submit your, say yes, after you get that unfunded approval, you would be eligible to receive an apportionment July 1st, 2018 or after. In my example here, I've said, okay, well, we get an announcement of a bond sale, and the board can give apportionments to all those who said yes, and that would come potentially in August. If you get an apportionment and you're full funding, you'll have 90 days then to submit your fund release if you were a full funding and you participated. If you're a reservation of funds, that apportionment date starts your 12-month window. So you would have from August 29, 2018 all the way to August 28, 2019 to submit your final approved plans, and then your 90-day clock starts. So theoretically, if you are needing time to complete your plans, to really flush out the final aspects of your project, a fund release potentially would not be due based on these timelines until November 27th of 2019. So that's quite a ways out, and really a lot of time built in there to help you, give you that time if you're still on the early planning phases of your project right now. And this is an example of participation in that first priority funding filing round. My next example is an example of a district who says, you know what, that's great, I got my unfunded approval in May of 2018, but I'm going to take a risk here because I really need more time and not participate in that filing round and take my occurrence. I'm going to wait and participate in the next filing round, which is November 2018, 30 days, November 7th to December 6th, 2018. In that case, I've now made myself eligible to get an apportionment January 1st, 2019 or later. My example here is that there's a bond sale and apportionments are given in April of 2019. Me, the applicant who's participated in that November 2018 filing round, gets an apportionment on April 24th. If I was a full funding application, then I have 90 days to submit my fund release. If I was a reservation of funds, now my 12-month clock has started. So then my plans aren't due until April 23rd of 2020. Last day to submit anyway. Then my 90-day clock starts such that maybe I won't even do a fund release, or I could have up until, in my example, July of 2020 to submit it. So I know the priority funding process has been around for a while. We've gotten lots of questions from districts who were concerned about, gosh, will I have time to really flush out my project, get my plans approved. And so I hope these examples here of potential timelines help you see how you can use the priority funding process to basically plan your project and to figure out how that could work for you or work with you. So after you've gotten your project apportionment and you've built your awesome new Career Tech facilities on site, all applications after you've gotten your fund release are subject to the program accountability process. We'll be checking for substantial progress after your fund release, and these projects are subject to grant agreements and a final accountability expenditure audit. These projects are not subject to the 60% commensurate requirement, and if you are familiar with the new construction or modernization project review process, then you know what the 60% commensurate is. It's basically your project has to be, 60% of it has to be hard construction costs. It's not a requirement here in the CTE program. There's no retention of savings. So when you're done with your project, if you haven't spent all of your grant funds as shown in your expenditure audit, those will come back to the program and potentially get reallocated to another district at some point. And these are our application submittal dates. Just a reminder, as John mentioned, we are planning for a second cycle, another $125 million, potentially around September 2018. Those dates will be coming forward. And then after that, these two rounds, there's still another $250 million out there to schedule future Career Technical Education Facilities Program rounds for. Here is my contact information, as well as my manager, Brian Lepask. And that's available on our website as well. And resources for the program. These are kind of hard to see all the way from there, but on our site, excuse me. If you go to it and just look under programs, it'll take you to the there'll be an option for the Career Technical Education Facilities Program. And a reminder of the CDE page. I'd like to note we have copies of our frequently asked questions here, as well as they are posted on our website for your reference. And I'll invite Lisa Silverman back up here.
So I apologize. I know the next sector was supposed to be the Division of State Architect, and I know we've been having some communication challenges this morning, and unfortunately that representative won't be here today, so I apologize in advance. But anyway, he was just going to go over some presentation slides. We will have this presentation also on our website as well. And we'll look forward to have maybe a follow-up segment of this presentation where Division of State Architect will present this information in the future, so that way we can close the gap. But with that, we look forward to having, again, a robust filing round and looking forward to that awarding grants for projects. And this wraps it up, so we will take a break. And I appreciate your time today, and thank you again.